The Grand Canyon stands apart as one of life's greater episodes. To stand on the rim of the stupendous gorge as it receives its earliest greetings from the god of day is to enjoy in a moment compensation for long years of ordinary, uneventful life. So wrote John Stoddard, the great travel writer, in 1898 of this spectacular wonder of the Arizona desert. Carved by the Colorado River, this gem of geology stands alone as one of the world's great sights. How do you describe such an attraction? Superlatives abound. The longest, the deepest, the widest, the biggest, they all apply here in this sculptured cathedral of stone. Today, visitors come from the four corners of the globe. They stand on the rim and gaze down a full mile as each contemplates the persistent forces of nature that have been at work here for so very long. Visitors still write the traditional "wish you were here" postcard as each attempts to convey in a few lines some of the powerful emotions this canyon evokes. And for the hardy traveler, the trails beckon. Bright Angel Trail, the most popular, will take you all the way to the bottom of the canyon in one of the world's most strenuous hikes. Each year, thousands of people make this trek as they attempt to find out firsthand some of the varying moods of the canyon walls. Many go down only part way, others travel all the way to the bottom, to the Phantom Ranch and the river. But regardless of how far down you go, as you take each step on the rough and rocky trail, there is a gnawing realization that you must come back out. There will be no helicopter, no elevator, no escalator. You get yourself out of the Grand Canyon just as you got yourself in, with your legs. And believe me, the trek back out is much, much harder than the trek in. As you near the bottom, the perspective changes. Instead of looking down, you now look up. Cactus blossoms provide a foreground for a new and different angle of view. And at the bottom of the canyon is the mighty Colorado River, still carving, still doing its job, gouging this gorge deeper and deeper. From a distance, the river appears minute in relation to the canyon walls. But as you grow close and stand over the churning stream, you grow to understand some of the powerful forces of nature that have been at work here for so very long. And finally, you must begin to head back out. The hardest part of the hike is here. You go slow, you take it easy. Heat exhaustion is common in the summer months, water very scarce. Your feet will hurt long before you see the rim. But for the truly adventuresome person, this is an experience not to be missed. For by going to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, you carve and create a memory that never fades. But if you would like to have the experience without the blisters on your feet, well, there is another way. Each morning, as the sun sends its first pinkish glows deep into the canyon walls, men are busy preparing a group of unwilling participants for your pleasure, the mules. There is no attraction of the Grand Canyon as well known worldwide as the mule ride. Each year, thousands of people scramble for reservations to endure one of life's most grueling and unpleasant experiences, namely being saddled to a bulky, stubborn mule for hours on end. To my mind, it is the single most masochistic amusement in the world. But thousands of people do it each year, and in spite of what they may tell their friends, thousands more scramble to do it the following year as well. No, dear, this is not a Gary Cooper movie. Giddy Up will not move that mule. Well, off we go. Take a look at the confidence on those faces. Take a good look because it's the last time you're going to see it. By the time this mule train comes out of the canyon, any confidence these people may have had in their saddle abilities will have vanished long ago with the wind. It is a thrilling experience, and you'll get your first thrill when your mule spots a juicy clump of grass 2 feet over the edge of a 1,000-foot drop-off and decides to have lunch with you still on board. The wranglers proudly boast over the fact that they have never lost a mule. Unfortunately, they don't bother to tell you about the mule riders. Well, eventually you get to the bottom, and eventually you must begin to head back out. Now here is where you have an advantage over the hiker, because now the mule gets to do all of the hard work. Although after you have been jostled up and down and back and forth for hours on end, you will truly wonder if it wouldn't be easier if you just got off and walked. It's also at about this point that you will grow to understand one of the truisms of the Grand Canyon. Namely, that anyone who goes to the bottom of the Grand Canyon and returns will return with blisters. The hiker will have them on the bottom of his feet. You will have them in a very different spot. But doesn't this look like an enthusiastic group, ready to spend the rest of their lives riding the open range? Because of the massive numbers of foreign visitors at the Grand Canyon today, this is one of the few places in the world where you can hear, in 6 different languages, the phrase, "That's the dumbest thing I ever did in my life." And finally, it's time for your diploma. Proof that you did it. You'll need that when you get home to impress your friends. But believe me, these people will need no diploma to prove they did it. Yes, it's the Grand Canyon. Awesome, spectacular, and fun. Don't miss it. You can hardly afford to pass by. The greatest national treasure we have. Now from the state of Arizona, we move east to the state of Florida and the endless Everglades. Few parks of the national park system bring to mind such specific images as this vast swamp on the tip of the Floridian Peninsula. And few parks live up to those expectations less. Here you will likely find your preconceived ideas to be challenged. The endless groves of cypress trees entwined with Spanish moss hardly exist at all. Most of the Everglade is an endless sea of sawgrass, standing quietly in the brackish swamp. Well, after you discover this, you can leave angry and disappointed, or you can stay and explore what the park has to offer. If you choose the latter, you will be richly rewarded and will soon grow to realize that this is one of our most special national parks. Wildlife abounds, often in small, common forms, sometimes large, rather uncommon forms. These leatherback turtles crawl onto the shore during the summer months to lay their eggs. And as you watch this small rite of nature, you grow to realize that all of the years of protection have dampened these creatures' natural fears of man. Will you see the Everglades' most popular resident during the summer months? Yes, even in summer you will see him. But you're more likely to find the alligators in the cool winter months when the glades dry up and they congregate among the few remaining water holes. These giant reptiles roam freely through the park, often crossing the visitor's path. And yet the Park Service rarely reports an accident. Alligators are actually quite shy and not likely to attack human beings unless provoked. And a tribute to the park visitors is that most people understand the rights of the natural inhabitants and are aware of the fact that they are merely visitors in these protected lands. But of all of the park's many different features, certainly the most impressive are the endless, beautiful species of birds. Lovely birds that nest in the mangrove trees, feed in the swamp, and call the parklands home. James Audubon came here to the Steamy Keys to record the story of these birds, and his records in oil document many species that no longer exist. For while the flocks are impressive today, they are a mere remnant of the millions of birds that once called this park home. The Everglades is cursed by its location, and the National Park Service has an ongoing battle to even keep the swamp alive. For this delicate ecological system to function properly, it needs water. Fresh water flows out of the sloughs to the north, mixing with the salt water from the Florida Keys to the south to create a brackish swamp. The balance is very delicate, and today that balance is in upheaval. The city of Miami, with its housing and industry, looms immediately north of the park borders, and water, which once flowed into the glades, is now diverted for man's use in the southeastern coastal communities. Progress is necessary, we all know that, but much of what happened here was truly avoidable, and the Everglades point out clearly that our most treasured national lands can be damaged beyond repair by thoughtless environmental decisions. As you look at these beautiful birds, it is a sad but true fact that their numbers are dwindling, and at this point, there is very little that can be done. But the Everglades does still offer a variety of attractions for the visitor. But if you would like to enjoy the Everglades' best-known attraction, an airboat ride, you'll have to leave the park itself. These noisy craft are no longer allowed inside the park boundaries. But if you'll go just outside the border, you can hop on board and skim out over the endless sea of sawgrass and explore the Everglades the way the early Florida pioneers did when they were mapping out the southeastern coastal region during the first part of this century. The reason for the giant propeller fan is quite obvious. The water here is far too shallow to allow an underwater prop. And the nicest thing about the speed is that you're going so fast that the mosquitoes don't have time to make a meal of your arm. I should perhaps point out here that the Everglades' most common resident is by no means the alligator, but rather the summer mosquito. And if you happen to be traveling here in July or August, don't set foot outside your car without a can of insect repellent. The Everglades, it's lovely, quiet, delicate, and probably our most endangered national treasure. From the state of Florida, once again we move back to the state of Arizona. This time, the silent, eerie, petrified forest. As you gaze out over the endless painted desert, try to comprehend the fact that millions of years ago, this region was much like the Everglades are today. It was a vast inland sea filled with teeming wildlife and dotted with lush green tropical vegetation and gigantic trees. With the passage of vast periods of time, the trees slowly fell, and in time they were covered with volcanic ash and mud. The lack of oxygen arrested the decaying process, and slowly the trees were filled with silica compounds, and they became petrified, solid stone. In time, the seas vanished, and they were replaced with the desert, and once again the stately logs became visible, this time glistening with jasper and agate, colorful reminders of what this region must have been like long before man arrived, when dinosaurs roamed the open plains, and creatures that would be totally alien to modern man called the marshy swamplands of what is today central Arizona home. But the desert is by no means a lifeless place. Life teems in the desert, often in small, unusual ways. The wildflowers blossom between the jasper and the agate logs and show clearly nature's ability to establish a foothold in the driest and most desolate spots of the world. The petrified forest. It's another example of the strange and unusual ways the world has evolved. But to appreciate all of the different ways the Earth has changed, we now move far to the west, 2,500 miles into the Pacific, to the state of Hawaii and Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. Ringing the big island of Hawaii are the black sand beaches, and these beaches tell a part of the story of this park, for the sand is lava, broken and splintered by the endless surf. For Hawaii is a vast chain, 1,600 miles long, 132 islands strong, 7 of them inhabited, each and every one a volcano that has arisen from the sea. Because of the difference in the mineral makeup of these various volcanic rocks, the erosion didn't always take place in the same way. On the island of Oahu, these red iron-laden cliffs didn't erode into sand, but rather the beautiful and jagged cliff formations that you see along the leeward coast of the island today. And on the big island of Hawaii, in the center of the national park, Kilauea Crater still spits its steam and vapors. This is one of the most active volcanoes in the world. It has been in some sort of eruption for nearly 100 years. The mountain of Mauna Kea on the Big Island is the tallest mountain in the world if you measure it from its base at the floor of the Pacific Ocean. 14,000 feet above the surface and 19,000 feet below the surface make this taller than even the peak of Mount Everest in the Himalaya range. In time, the lava snaked its way over the existing layers, and as it did, it crumbled, and through rain and wind and pounding seas, it was pulverized into the unique red, dusty soil that Hawaii was to offer as a foundation for the life that was to come millions of years later. When life did arrive on the islands, it found a hostile environment. The trees that managed to survive were destroyed countless times in the never-ending growth of the islands. On the island of Maui stands Haleakala, a separate national park. In Hawaiian, Haleakala means House of the Sun. Today, this is the largest dormant volcano in the world, rising 12,000 feet above the ocean surface. And this too will one day, again in the future, erupt and explode in a violent fury, creating the same type of displays that Kilauea Crater offers the visitor today who is lucky enough to be on hand to witness these spectacular displays from the Earth's inner core. From the state of Hawaii, we now move back to the mainland. This time the hills of Tennessee and the Great Smoky Mountains, the nation's most popular national park with 10 million annual visitors. Astride a common border of North Carolina and Tennessee stands the Great Smoky Mountains, a masterwork of the Appalachian highland. The name is confusing until you visit here, for at a glance, it's easy to see why these mountains were named as they were. The perpetually clinging mists and fog give a smoky appearance to this region that rarely knows a clear sunny day. Constant rains have helped to make this one of the lushest regions of the eastern United States. More different types of trees than in all of Europe cover the slopes of these low but ancient mountains of the east. Here in the Great Smoky Mountains, man has played an important role in history. These mountains were for centuries home to the Cherokee Indians. They lived here peacefully until the tide of pioneer settlers slowly forced them west. For a time, the pioneers lived among the Cherokees. They split the rails, fenced their herds, and went about creating a way of life in these harsh and lonely hills. They gained knowledge from the Cherokees. They took to raising maize, or corn as we know it, and they built mills along the quiet, peaceful mountain streams. For these early Appalachian settlers, they knew no life of ease. The Appalachian range was harsh, the farmland poor, but they were a persistent people, and through sheer determination, they carved out a way of life that continues to exist today for many of the hill people of Appalachia. For these early pioneer settlers, much of the foundation of their lives was in their fundamentalist religion. Simple, clapboard churches dot the landscape of the national park today and remind us that for these early settlers, much of their faith in the future was placed in powers far above and beyond themselves. And when they died, they were laid to rest in the church graveyards, generation after generation, here in the hills of Tennessee. Today, the pioneers are gone, the wagon trains are silent, and they have been replaced by modern-day travelers in search of a wilderness experience. And each year they come in ever-increasing numbers. Last year, 10 million. And each and every car traveling through the national park had to cross the one 2-lane mountain road that connects Gatlinburg to Cherokee, creating an overabundance of both traffic and people. Adding to the dilemma is the simple fact that the National Park Service has no control over what develops outside its boundaries. And on either end of this narrow 2-lane mountain road have developed enormous, sprawling tourist communities. This is Gatlinburg, Tennessee, a community of more motels, neon signs, pizza parlors, and hot dog stands than Coney Island. And whether you do or don't like this type of a community, it adds immeasurably to the park's crowd problems. For it attracts people in near uncontrolled numbers, houses them, feeds them, amuses them, and then after collecting vast sums of tourist dollars, dumps them regularly and unceremoniously into the unprepared and undeveloped national park. The private sector can, of course, simply build more roads and parking lots. The National Park Service can't. They have a moral and an ecological commitment to the land. The building of a 4-lane superhighway over the Smoky Mountains is simply not an environmental option. And when the private sector develops to its very limits on either end of a narrow 2-lane mountain road, problems are sure to occur. At this point, there is little that can be done. The Cross Mountain Road is an important link between two states and cannot be sealed off. But these low, gray, misty mountains of the east have been here, according to geologists, for 500 million years. They are among the oldest mountains on the face of the earth, and so it stands to reason that somehow they too will survive the 20th century, man and his modern machines. And now from the hills of Tennessee, we move back to the west, this time the state of New Mexico, the southeastern corner, and the world-renowned Carlsbad Caverns. On a high, dry, desolate plateau, in a place where you would never expect to find a cave, because caves are almost always created out of wet mountainous regions, a young cowboy by the name of Jim White was riding the open plain on horseback in 1904. On the horizon, he saw what he thought was the billowing smoke of an awesome fire. But as he rode in nearer, he realized that what he had thought was smoke was instead millions and millions of bats flying into the night air out of a massive hole in the cliff. He ventured in closer. He lit a piece of dead cactus and dropped it into the chasm. He had discovered the most amazing system of caves in the world, a system that would be named Carlsbad. A few days later, he coaxed a young Mexican to accompany him, and together with only a lantern, they ventured deep into the cave. And what they discovered was truly amazing, for their smoky kerosene light illuminated, for the first time in the history of the world, a place that had been in total blackness since the beginning of time. And what had occurred in that blackness was truly amazing. Giant, staggering limestone formations created by the painstakingly slow process of single drops of mineral-laden water. Gigantic rooms, one large enough to hold the entire U.S. Capitol building. An amazing, awesome, silent, subterranean world. But for the early settlers of the West, this was not to be marveled at for its beauty, but rather exploited for its riches. Mining claims were staked, and within 20 years, 4 mining companies had taken 100,000 tons of bat guano out of the cave as commercial fertilizer. In 1923, the U.S. government gave the caverns protection, and today you can venture deep into these caves, gaze on these stalactile draperies, and see with ease what nature has spent millions of years in creating. Carlsbad Caverns, one of the most amazing spots on Earth, in one of the most unlikely places of the world. From the state of New Mexico, we now move west to the state of California, the High Sierra Mountains, and Yosemite National Park. This park, along with the Grand Canyon and the Tetons, stands as one of the 3 crown jewels of our nation's scenic heritage. And we begin our visit to the Yosemite Valley, not in summer with throngs of visitors, but rather winter, when the visitor stands alone among the snow-capped peaks. Winter is a breathtaking time of year in Yosemite, a time when these magnificent mountains are deceptively softened by an endless blanket of snow. High in the mountains, the upper falls continues to cascade over the cliff, leaving an icy, frosty mist along the granite wall. Yes, this is the time of year to come, a time to relax, enjoy some winter sports, and perhaps brush up on your skiing. Yosemite has the oldest ski school in the state of California. Ski schools, of course, are notorious meeting places for single people. Well, here at Yosemite is a ski school where everyone you meet is guaranteed to be single, although not necessarily looking for a mate. Well, once you have the hang of it, you can give it a whirl as the Badger Pass runs beckon you on to the endless snowpack slopes. Here in Yosemite, the snows fall and melt quickly, but frequent storms replenish the winter blanket. The clouds roll in and cling like cotton to the granite walls. The temperatures drop and the snows begin to fall, and within a few hours, Yosemite is turned into a lonely gray world of snow and ice. Throughout the history of Yosemite, certain people have come here and stayed. John Muir, the great naturalist, Ansel Adams, the photographer, Albert Bierstadt, the painter. Today, many young people, often not out of the traditional mold, still come, and many still stay. Louis Kemper is an example of one such person. Originally from Baltimore, Louis came to Yosemite a number of years ago and was so taken with the beauty of the park that he simply never left. Work for the Ansel Adams Gallery and his freelance photography support him as he explores this magnificent mountain world that he now calls home. During each season of the year, Louis can be found on the trails looking for new and different scenes of nature to record with his cameras. Winter is an especially breathtaking time of year, and the chill of the January air a minor inconvenience to record such scenes of beauty. But the seasons do change. Winter ends and spring arrives, resplendent in green, the forest floor a field of wildflowers. Spring is perhaps the loveliest time of year in Yosemite, and probably the loveliest time of year in all of our national parks. It is a season of renewal, a time when nature is at her most optimistic. Here in Yosemite, the days lengthen, the temperatures rise, and the snows begin to melt as the spring runoff gets underway. The normally calm Merced River is for a short time swollen out of its banks as nature rids herself of winter's unwanted snow. Spring is a season of many faces. There's a violent side of spring with torrential rains and floods. There is also a quiet side of the season of greening meadows, returning birds, beautiful butterflies, and the endless fields of wildflowers. Each April, Yosemite comes alive with color in this changing, renewing scene. And with the coming of spring, once again we find Louis back on the trails, looking for new and different scenes of nature to record with his cameras. This time he searches out a more subtle story, a simple tale of blooming wildflowers in a greening meadow. Louis is a part of a very special group of people, a group of people who feel a sense of conscience about this park and these lands. And it is because of people like Louis that the future of this park is in many respects insured and guaranteed. For nearly a century, the National Park Service has survived and flourished because of a small but dedicated group of people who have always placed the land and its future ahead of their own personal gain. Yosemite is a magnificent, awesome, beautiful world, and it is also unique. Each of our national parks is unique. So where should we end our journey? Here in Yosemite, proclaiming this to be the most spectacular park of all? Hardly. That would be far too subjective a decision. Should I take you back across the country and show you the single most impressive sight? Well, I could, but I really wouldn't know where to begin. No, to end our journey, we're going to pause for a few moments and thumb back through our album of portraits and listen. For here in the national parks, the lyric, "God shed His grace on thee," is oh so very real. Americans have been graced with the most extraordinary collection of God's wonders on earth, and it is our duty and our responsibility to preserve and protect these lands as the true national treasures they are. For these parks are worth more than all the gold of Fort Knox. These parks are one of America's greatest assets as a nation. In 1956, a government report observed that the national parks were an investment in the physical, spiritual, and mental well-being of the American people. Moreover, they were an investment in something as simple and yet as basic as good citizenship, love of country. Throughout the history of America, there have been many, many good times, and there have been some bad times. And in both the good times and the bad times, these parks, in a small way, do help to remind us that yes, America, God did shed His grace on thee.